The topic we'll be covering is around the concepts of software-defined data centers and the software-defined era. If you look at your homes, or you look at your cars, or you look at the lives that you lead, from the telephones you have and the cell phones and so forth, there's a transformation happening, a 50-year trend that's occurring where the role of hardware and software is fundamentally changing. If I bring these components together, the compute components with what I'm able to do with the network and security pieces, and the compute component enabled us to do a storage virtualization component, as many of you know, with the hypervisors that you use, I now have the foundation for the software-defined data center. What does that give me the ability to do? Well, it fundamentally changes how I can actually manage and deploy services back out to my end customers. So I'll walk through 3 examples of how this fundamentally changes the IT infrastructure in an automation and an orchestration mechanism, because now I've moved that intelligence from being hardware bound to being a software component in my infrastructure. The first obvious area where customers take advantage of something like this is just simply automating IT processes. I can leverage orchestration capabilities either from VMware or from OpenStack, or build your own or CloudStack, to have an API model to deliver those services, as opposed to a hand-fingered CLI model to make sure that I'm configuring the appropriate components of my infrastructure appropriately. A second area is around security. And this is where actually we're seeing an enormous amount of traction from a VMware perspective, leveraging this software abstraction layer from a software-defined data center model to solve security problems. Imagine if we could take every individual VM and say, you, Mr. VM or Ms. VM, can only talk to this other VM, only in this capability and protocol and port that we would allow. Wouldn't that fundamentally change the dynamics of how we would segment that infrastructure? I'm now, for the first time, able to actually have a policy-based automation layer inside my data center that doesn't just map to a port and IP address being my security policy mechanism, but now I can create groups and manage those groups in a way that will allow me to, when an instantiation of that group gets a new VM, the policies with that group now map to it. So my security posture can now be dynamic within my data center, taking advantage of that software-defined layer to be able to enable, again, the abstraction and the simplicity with which that policy can be mapped. If I moved things into software, I now begin to actually leverage the portability of my networking and security capabilities with my virtual machines. So that enables the ability to look at things like disaster recovery in a completely different way. Imagine if I could actually move my capabilities from a virtual machine and a virtual topology from one site to the other without having to re-IP address my infrastructure, or worry about all of the complexity associated with it, because both of them now reside in software. I can reduce the time to save between moving between those data centers by almost 80%. And then finally, many customers are now looking at this capability as part of a hybrid strategy. So VMware has a public cloud capability that leverages both the technologies we have on-prem and off-prem to allow you to manage your topologies across both your on-prem and off-prem through a hybrid capability, giving you the same operating model that you had on-prem that you would have off-prem. For building the business case, obviously from a capex perspective, when we talked about security, I don't have to necessarily buy the multitude of firewalls or IDS or IPS appliances that I would have normally had to buy to manage from going to a perimeter to a distributed ubiquitous architecture. But the other component of capex which becomes intriguing is that I can begin to actually extend the life of the hardware that I have today. And then without question, the operating model of the number of people and the time it takes to deliver becomes absolutely staggering. And that was one of the things that really drove the initiation of the software-defined model. The companies that were the most innovative were driven fundamentally by speed. There are a multitude of classes, multitude of certifications and capabilities for your people to take advantage of, and so I strongly encourage, as hopefully one of the takeaways from today's presentation, is better clarity on how a software-defined model can really change how you operate your IT organization, fundamentally change not just your infrastructure as a service capabilities, but enhance and enable your SaaS and your PaaS capabilities, because now your infrastructure is operating at a much more efficient capability, and to be able to really deliver that back to the end customers and to your business units to a new level of an SLA. Thank you very much for the time today.